Hello, this is the Death Row and Executions channel. My name is Paco. You can also follow me on Facebook for updates and more Death Row news. There will be a link to my Facebook in the description below. Also, check out my other channel here on YouTube called The Maximum Sentence, where I cover recent crimes and convictions. There will be a link for that as well. Stephen Christopher Stanko, who is currently 57 years old, was sent to prison in 1996 for assault and kidnapping. He ended up serving 8.5 years of his 10-year sentence and was released in the year 2004. He has been considered highly intelligent. Stephen Stanko even wrote a book while he was in prison called Living in Prison, A History of the Correctional System with an Insider's View. When Stanko was released from prison in 2004, he was 36 years old. What got Stanko sent to prison in the first place was an assault on his ex-girlfriend, Elizabeth Buckner. They had been living together in Goose Creek, South Carolina, but after some time went by, Stanko lost his job and Elizabeth noticed that money, jewelry, and other valuables was disappearing from her house. Elizabeth also learned that Stanko was defrauding people, stealing cars, and that he even stole a computer from the home of one of her friends. When she'd had enough, Elizabeth told Stanko to leave her house. However, as we would soon learn, Stanko did not like being confronted about his wrongdoings, and he didn't take rejection well. Late one night, Stanko brutally assaulted Elizabeth while she was asleep. He tried to suffocate her, and he tried to strangle her. He tied up Elizabeth, made her sit on the toilet while he took a bath, and he prevented her from leaving the house, which is what led to the kidnapping charge. Stanko, however, then simply left the house. But he was captured 3 days later and pleaded guilty to the assault and kidnapping charges. After getting out of jail 8.5 years later, in 2004, he made his way to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. I personally have been to Myrtle Beach many times since it's the closest beach to us here in Charlotte, North Carolina, about a 4-hour drive. Anyway, it's not just a beach. There's a big residential community there as well. Once in Myrtle Beach, Stanko rented a room from a woman there, a widow. He was accepted for the rental, even with his background fully detailed in the rental application. He was also visited on occasion by his parole officer. Stanko ended up living there for about a year, and aside from occasionally being late with the rent and having difficulty getting a job because of his background, he didn't really cause any problems there. Sometime later, in the year 2005, Stanko was spending a lot of time in a public library, according to him, doing research for a second book, something about serial killers or murderers or something like that. He met a woman at the Sacasty Library who was the research librarian, a 43-year-old woman named Laura Ling. And Laura was very impressed with the very intelligent man who also dressed well in a suit and tie and spoke well, and he spoke of his prestigious legal career. He did that. Anyway, Laura was divorced. She had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl named Christina. Apparently, an arrangement was made during that divorce that the boys will live with their dad and Laura will raise Christina. By the year 2005, Christina Ling was 15 years old. Stanko and Laura began dating, and after a few months, he ended up moving in with her and Laura's daughter in the Murrells Inlet area in Georgetown County, about a 20-minute drive from the library in Myrtle Beach. During his time at the library, Stanko also met an older man who was a regular there, 72-year-old Henry Turner, and they ended up becoming good friends. According to Henry's son, his father was drawn to Stanko because of his intelligence. Stanko would, in fact, also later confess to Laura that he had served time in prison for assault and kidnapping, but he played it down by saying it was a simple domestic violence situation where they were both fighting with each other and he got most of the blame because he didn't let her leave the house. He told Laura that he was a changed man, that he just wanted to write books, and Laura was convinced. While at the library, Stanko pretended to have great paralegal experience, and he helped other older people in the library with insurance claims and other legal matters. But it all turned out to be fraudulent work that he was doing, and he was asking for up to $1,000 for his assistance in filling out forms that he was also supposed to file for them, but he never did. The relationship between Stanko and Laura Ling ended up becoming very rocky, especially after all these people at the library, who were all very close to Laura, were complaining to Laura that her boyfriend was stealing from them, and she confronted him about it. Shortly after midnight, on what was now April the 8th of the year 2005, Stephen Stanko brutally attacked Laura while she was asleep. Laura's teenage daughter, Christina Ling, was asleep in her bedroom and didn't hear the assault when it was happening. Moments later, while leaving Laura to die on the bedroom floor, Stanko entered Christina's bedroom, and that woke her up. He began beating her, and she ran into her mother's bedroom only to see her mom on the floor, barely alive. Stanko continued beating Christina. He then got on top of her, told her that if she screams, he'll kill her, and then brutally, indecently assaulted her. He also tied her hands, and when he saw that Laura on the floor was still moving, he strangled her to death. He then slit Christina's throat twice with a knife. Stanko then showered, dressed, loaded all his things into Laura's 1994 red Mustang convertible, and drove off, thinking that both mother and daughter were dead. But he was wrong. Stanko drove toward the Myrtle Beach area and continued on to Conway, South Carolina, where his good friend, 72-year-old Henry Tucker, resided in a mobile home. Upon arriving at Henry's house, he parked Laura's Mustang in the driveway and knocked on Henry's door in the middle of the night. When Henry opened the door, Stanko was crying and distraught and told Henry that his father just passed away and he just needed someone to be with and to talk to. Henry comforted Stanko the best he could and allowed Stanko to sleep on the couch that night. Meanwhile, back in Murrells Inlet, 15-year-old Christina regained consciousness and dragged herself to a phone, leaving a trail of blood. Barely able to speak, she called 911 and told the dispatcher that she was indecently assaulted. She actually used the R word during the call, but you know, Disney Channel wannabe YouTube doesn't allow me to say it in these videos. Christina also told the dispatcher that her mom was dead. And she told the dispatcher that the killer was her mom's boyfriend, Stephen Stanko. She even spelled out the last name for the dispatcher. Christina's dad, Chris Ling, was also notified of the situation, and he rushed to the scene of the crime as paramedics were attending to Christina. Back at Henry Turner's house, it was now morning. Henry and Stanko had breakfast together. Henry then went to shave in the bathroom. Stanko knew that Henry had a gun and where he kept it. Stanko retrieved the gun, went to the bathroom, and shot Henry once in the back. After Henry was on the floor, Stanko shot him again. Stanko took his things from Laura's Mustang and loaded it all into Henry's car after taking some money and the gun from Henry's house. He then drove off in Henry's car. Henry's body was discovered a day later. And when Laura's Mustang was seen at the crime scene, investigators quickly knew who the killer was. Also, what Stephen Stanko didn't know was that moments before Henry was killed, moments before he had killed Henry, Henry had spoken to his son on the telephone and told him that Stanko was there, which is how we know the story about Stanko saying his father had just died and then slept on the couch. Unfortunately, at the time of that phone call, Henry's son had still not heard news of the murder of Laura Ling and assault of Christina Ling in Georgetown County, and that police were looking for Stanko. While on the run, Stanko used Laura's debit card to deplete all the money in Laura's bank account. A massive nationwide manhunt began in the search for Stephen Stanko that involved police, the FBI, and United States Marshals. Stanko eventually made his way to Augusta, Georgia, and lost himself in the massive crowds of people from all over the country that were there for the Masters golf tournament that weekend. Whether arriving at that location was coincidence or he was smart enough to know how hard it would be to find him there is not clear. Back in Goose Creek, South Carolina, Stanko's ex-girlfriend, Elizabeth Buckner, the one who got him put in prison for assault and kidnapping back in 1996, saw news on television of Stephen Stanko as a wanted murderer on the run, and she panicked, thinking he might be on his way to where she was and that she's next on his hit list. So she took precautions to protect herself, but she was a nervous wreck. Just a few days after the murders in South Carolina, Stanko managed to charm his way into the life of another woman in Augusta, Georgia. But that woman was later alerted to the news by a friend, and she saw Stanko's face on the news, and she called police. While she was talking to police, Stanko had called the woman to let her know that he was having breakfast at a restaurant. Georgia police went to the restaurant and arrested Stanko as he was leaving. Stephen Stanko went on trial in South Carolina for the murder of Laura Ling a year later, in 2006. At first, Stanko wanted to try a defense of being mentally insane, but the court ruled that he didn't qualify for that. So he tried to be clever and changed the wording to brain damaged. He probably should have devoted a lot more time to legal studies if he really thought that was going to work. During trial, Christina Ling's father, Chris Ling, was seated just a few feet away from Stanko, staring him down, but Stanko would not turn to look at him. According to Chris, it took everything he had in him to keep himself from taking justice in his own hands right there in the courtroom. And it was Christina Ling testifying, a testimony that reported state had jurors in tears, that put the final nail in Stanko's coffin, so to speak. Stanko was found guilty, and he was sentenced to death and was sent off to death row to await execution. An execution that is scheduled to happen on June 13 of this year, 2025. It appears, as we have seen in many prior cases in different states when there are multiple murders, that the state of South Carolina decided to save the taxpayers' money and not proceed with another trial for the murder of Henry Turner, since Stanko was now on death row anyway. But this infuriated Henry Turner's family, and they demanded justice for the elderly man by taking Stanko to trial for Henry's murder. And South Carolina eventually obliged the family's request. 3 years after the first trial, in 2009, Stanko went on trial again, this time for the murder of Henry Turner, and he was found guilty again and sentenced to death again. Laura Ling had graduated from North Garland High School in Texas, where she was born and raised, where she was a member of the Beta Club, National Honor Society, vice president of Student Council, and nominee for Miss North Garland. She later graduated from Texas A&M University, where she received a degree in English and was on the honor roll her freshman year. Laura received her Master of Library Science from the University of South Carolina, where she later ended up living. Laura was also a member of the Precious Blood of Christ Catholic Church. Henry Lee Turner, who was either 72 years old or 74, depending on the report in the case files, was a man who honored this country with his service in the United States Air Force. He was a retired master sergeant after 20 years of service. He left behind 3 children and 6 grandchildren. Henry was laid to rest as requested by him by having his ashes scattered at sea. Please remember to subscribe for more death row and upcoming execution stories so that you're alerted when the next one comes out. You can also follow me on Facebook for updates and more death row news. There will be a link to my Facebook in the description below. My name is Paco Rivera. Thank you for watching. Take care and bye for now.